Hello and welcome to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging field of data science. We bring the best minds in data, software engineering, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now here are your hosts, Frank Lavinia and Andy Leonard.
Hello and welcome back to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. If you like to think of data as the new oil, then you can consider us Car Talk, because we focus on where the rubber meets the road. And with me on this epic road trip down the information superhighway of epic data-ness is my co-pilot, Andy Leonard.
Data-ness. I like that.
I like that too. It implies it's like truthiness, but it's for data people.
I dig that a lot. Yes, that's awesome.
We should get that on a t-shirt and sell it.
Data-ness. I like that a lot. So how are you today, Frank?
I'm good. I got a couple things in the hopper. I can't quite talk about yet, but sure. I am super excited. And,
cool.
Some cool stuff around the corner. But how are you? How's things in Farmville?
I'm doing well, but I think the best description would be a little bit of audio effect here. So here we go. I'm hoping you can hear that.
I can hear that. You're pouring water, right? You're not recording
coffee.
This in your bathroom?
No, I'm not in the bathroom. This is coffee. Okay. Although, you know the way coffee works, right? Later.
Yeah.
Yes. But
you
no,
only rent.
It's the front end. That's right. You can only rent coffee and beer.
That's right. You only rent it. You only have it for a limited amount of time.
I'm actually doing really well, Frank. Better than I have been in a while. I was in a bit of a funk. A friend of mine passed away at the end of January. I traveled to Seattle this past weekend to attend his memorial service. It was a really, really beautiful, inspiring memorial service. But he's an exceptional dude, and his name was Tom Rausch, and I used to call Tom the best unpublished writer I know, but he had his book. He had a book published of his stories, which are out at tomroush.net, TOMROUSH.net. And the book is called, I have it here somewhere, but I can't put my hands on it. I believe it's called Stupid Things Papa Did When He Was Younger. It's a great title. And you can go read everything for free, out there at the at tomroush.net, but the ebook is available. The ebook was actually published just a few hours before he passed away. He was told it was live on Amazon, and they had the physical book, the very first copies of the physical book available at the memorial service. I encourage everyone listening, everybody that likes to read good stories. I meant what I said. Tom was the best unpublished writer I know. There's a lot of really good published writers out there, Frank, but Tom's one of the best of those as well. And I find his stories particularly moving.
Wow. Wow. It's tough when somebody passes away.
Well, it is, but he had battled cancer for many years, and so and he's a believer. So, as I'm confident he's in a different place, a better place. I'm confident I'll see him again, and so he's not suffering anymore. At a bare minimum, if you believe nothing else, his suffering has ended. And I was mopey. It was about a month until we had the service, and I was really mopey. But the service really did its thing for my soul. I just came off of 2.5 days, almost 3 full days of training, delivering expert SSIS along with Brent Ozar. I've got a webinar coming up later today. I've been doing these webinars, Frank, every Thursday at noon, a free webinar, and looking forward to this one on design patterns. I'm on a diet. I started that keto diet.
How's that going?
Well, so today is day 4, and it's going really well. So, Frank, you know this. I'm type 2 diabetic, and particularly nasty because I like consumed sugar. I think I slept in sugar as a kid. Yeah, I abused my poor pancreas, and I was on. I've been on the most medication you can take before the doctor says you have to start insulin, and it was interesting. So we did this expert SSIS class Monday, Tuesday, and a half day Wednesday, and I know me, and I do the last thing I could tolerate while trying to deliver 7 hours of training per day is a sugar crash. That just would not work. So we started eating better on Monday, and I just stopped taking the meds I take in the morning, which is about 2/3 of my medication. And I just took my meds at night. And what I noticed was my blood sugar started dropping. And this morning, after day 4, it is almost normal, Frank. And running on 1/3 of the meds, and it's almost normal. So that's very inspiring to me, because that's one of the reasons I want to do the diet is I want to drop some weight so that the type 2 diabetes will go away. I'm doing this to myself. It's just non-disciplined eating, and I'm very bad at that. But if I can lose this weight, get my sugar under control, the damage that I've done already won't go. Not all of it can heal. There's neuro damage that happens. So they say. Although I don't suffer from symptoms of that, but I'm sure it's there. But other stuff will, at a bare minimum, I'll stop hurting myself with my high sugar.
Right. And it's never too late to stop hurting yourself, as they say.
Amen. Amen to that. But that's what I'm doing. I know you've got some big news that you can't talk about yet. I'm excited because I know the big news.
Right.
Yeah. So, but
we'll have a special, maybe event. I don't know. We'll have to find happy music instead of the dramatic piano music.
Well, but, I could tell things were better because you and I have both been terribly busy. And that's a good thing. Most of it was good. The downside was we got really sparse the last month or so of last year and the beginning of this year with our data-driven podcast. You jumped right in and knocked out a couple of shows. We did a couple of recordings, and you do the editing work. Everyone should know this. I don't do anything except talk. Okay. Frank does the work.
And look pretty.
No, I thought that, but I was like, no. I've seen me. But Frank does all the work, and he fired back up on this a few weeks ago. We had the show with Mr. Heckman come out. We had the deep dive come out. And if I'm not mistaken, today is another deep dive. That's what we wanted to do.
It is. Now let's cue the dive alarm. So this is our second deep dive where we examine a technology, and it's just Andy and I talking, and we focus on a technology that's data related. The last time we focused on the topic of data science versus data engineering. We got some good feedback there.
Yes.
And today we're going to talk about something Andy is an expert in, and he talks a lot about. So I will play the FNG, the freaking new guy, as I ask him questions. Kids don't use the word FNG because the F is not necessarily for freaking.
True.
It's like the scene in was it Guardians of the Galaxy? Where it's like, what did he say? He said, "Welcome to the freaking Guardians of the Galaxy." Although he didn't say freaking. So, so with that, we're going to discuss kind of what exactly is, we're going to talk about what is SSIS, aside from being often misconstrued as talking about ISIS, which I'm sure has you on a couple of government watch lists.
Very well may. Well, whenever you do a search, for SSIS, you get, the last time I did it and looked, I think it was like 21 million results at Bingle. Mm-hmm. I totally ripped that off from Ed Danger Watson, by the way. And Ed's a presenter. He talks about SSIS too, but he says Bingle for the search engine. I like that.
I like that too. It's nice. And is his middle name really Danger?
I'm not sure, but he's on Facebook as Ed Danger Watson. So I always say it that way.
Danger Watson.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to. My wife kind of shot down the idea of giving our boys the name Danger as a middle name.
That would have been I think it's a cool middle name.
Yeah, well, I was trying to convince her, like, no, it's a French thing. It's like Danger.
That's a good try.
She's all right.
That really is. Well, you have French ancestry, right?
I do. So I thought it would fly. Lavinia or Lavigne is actually, French origin. So
sure, that was very clever though, and she didn't bite, huh?
I married smart, so which is 99% of the time is awesome, but you can't put anything past her. So,
well, I know your wife, and she's a charming lady.
She is also an engineer.
Yes, she is, and you're right. She's very smart. We've had conversations over dinners before, and I have nothing but respect and admiration for her. Both as being married to you, which let's be honest, being our wives, both of them put up with a lot.
Patience of a saint.
But she's also a technologist, and she is very sharp with that. But yeah, you search for SSIS on Bingo, you get like 21 million results or something. And it's not long before you get into surgical site. I'm going to mess this up. Secondary, I forget. It's secondary surgical site infections. I think that's it, or surgical site.
Oh, that sounds pleasant.
Yeah, SSI capitalized in a lowercase s. But, Bingo doesn't discriminate on case.
So what exactly is SSIS? I know that the SS stands for SQL Server.
Yes.
And so what does the IS stand for?
The IS stands for Integration Services. And the fact that the SS stands for SQL Server is, I think, the seed of a great amount of confusion, especially with recruiters and people who work in HR that are looking for folks to do this kind of work, because SQL Server is a popular relational database engine. And so you think if someone's good at the relational database engine, they're also going to be good at the other things in the Microsoft BI stack that have SQL Server in the name. So integration services, reporting services, analysis services, they all have SQL Server in their name.
Right. So there's the whole alphabet soup of things related to SQL Server. So you have SSRS and SSAS?
Yes. Yeah, that's analysis services in addition to SSIS, yeah.
And then RS is for reporting services.
Right. And then the tool, SSMS. So, yeah, they got 22 other letters. So SSSS.
No, but they really like
for that. Though. What's that?
What about SSIS as a service?
Well, that exists, actually. It's
SSIS?
Yeah, I guess you could go there.
I like to call it sassafras. I like to call it sassafras.
That works. That has legs, Frank. That'll preach, as we say in Farmville. But there is actually a service out there. It's part of Azure Data Factory version 2, and the official name is Azure Data Factory version 2 Integration Runtime. But it's also referred to as SSIS in the cloud. And it's been out there for, let's see, we're recording this in March of 2018. It's probably been about, 6 months, 7 months. It's been out. I want to say it was around September when they announced it. And you can, it is remarkably similar to SSIS running on premises. There's an instance of what's called the SSIS catalog, which is a framework for executing and configuring and capturing log messages from SSIS execution. And it's out there, and it's almost identical. In fact, I haven't found a difference between running SSIS catalog on premises and running it in the cloud, other than, there's both sides of this, right? It's on demand, so you could technically use it when you need it and then turn it off. Although at the time of this recording, and I know this is still true because I did this yesterday. It takes about 20 minutes to turn it on. So,
wow. So turn on SSIS in the cloud.
yeah. It's new.
I get this clear. Sorry.
That's good.
Is that part of ADF or Azure Data Factory?
It is, yeah. Azure Data Factory version 2. There's a version 1 and a version 2.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Got it.
So yeah, it takes.
Well, I remember.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I remember when I was I was studying the edX certification for Azure Data Factory, and it was kind of like this does a lot of things that Andy talks about that like are kind of in the periphery of my understanding.
Well, the big field is data integration or data engineering. I mean, there's a lot of I was going to say they cross a lot. There's a lot of overlap there in the Euler diagrams, which is the proper name for what we identify most often as Venn diagrams. Yep. EU.
Didn't know that.
LER. Yeah, Euler. So, but yeah, there's a lot of overlap there between data integration and data engineering. I think I would say there's probably a good data integration person is a data engineer, and I would hesitate to make a distinction between the two. Here's how it feels to me. Just completely, put asterisks around this. In my opinion, only. I think data engineering requires more understanding of the analytics part of this, more understanding, of what you're going to deliver and how it's going to be used. Whereas data integration focuses mostly on just, data, just what you're going to deliver. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, that makes sense. So just I'll repeat it just to make sure that I got it. Is that data integration is about getting something from one place to another in a slightly different format, possibly. Mm-hmm. Whereas data engineering, you're kind of plugged into the whole data science pipeline.
That's a better way to say it. Yeah. And it took way less than, the last 2 or 3 minutes I used trying to say it. Yes.
Oh, I had my neural network listening.
Well, I thought the coffee would help my neural network, but apparently it hasn't kicked in yet.
It takes about 20 minutes, I think.
Does it? So we've got a few minutes to go, but
so you'll be hopping at the end of the show.
That's it. Yes. So data integration is kind of the big field. Data engineering, I think, is a little bit bigger. Not much. I think data integration is a subset that fits inside of there. SSIS is just one tool that can be used to do data integration or data engineering. And there are others out there, and I think all of them have strengths and, all have benefits, and there's some liabilities with each. I've been working with SSIS since before it was released. And that, I've been able as a result to experience what I define as the corners in SSIS. All languages have corners. So I would say that SSIS probably has more than most. I usually tell people it has about 30.
30 corners. That's I don't even want to know what the word for that is. It's way beyond dodecahedron. So what is integration? Is integration a fancier word for ETL? And I'm talking about extract, transform, and load, not the code for the national carrier of Ethiopia.
Oh, that's funny.
There we go.
I like it. I would say ETL is a subset of data integration, and here's why I would make that distinction. ETL, extract, transform, and load, or its cousin, ELT, extract, load, and then transform, are typically used to load data warehousing, type targets. But you can do data integration on, say, just standing up an instance that's essentially a copy of your production data that can be used for querying, the read-only perhaps, that the analysts can hit or the business people can report against.
What is the distinction between ETL and ELT? Oh, other than that sounds like a sandwich.
ELT, what would the E stand? Egg, lettuce,
egg.
tomato?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good keto thing, doesn't it?
It actually does. Yeah. Yeah. Without the bread, you couldn't have the bread.
No. Bread's overrated. I've been doing keto, just so the listeners know, I've been doing keto kind of off and on, which is, I guess, technically not doing keto pure, but I've lost 20 pounds in 2017.
Wow, Frank, congratulations.
Thank you. And I feel better. I had a carb binge last week, and it's just, once you get used to not having carbs, you realize how evil sugar is.
Well, I don't want to, we'll take this a little path for a minute, but I've been shocked. I'm 3.5 days in. Okay. So I'm like an expert.
Right.
But what I've been shocked about most is how little I experience hunger.
Yeah.
That's floored me. But, my bride has done, she did about a month of research, Frank. She laid out 12 weeks of menus, and we're going to run this. We're going to run this for the next few months. So I also know that you've walked about 1,000 miles too.
Well, there's that too. Yeah. That helped. I have a treadmill desk, which I know makes me sound like a lunatic, but once you try it, you will understand why it's actually a good idea. So
no, you've done great with that. So back to your question, ETL versus ELT. It's really about where the transformation work happens, and often that transformation logic is a big hog for RAM, a big hog for CPU, and if we're talking about SSIS, we have a data flow task where we will pick up a bucket of rows, and it's a beautiful architecture. It's called the pipeline architecture. If you could picture, because I know you're a software developer, Frank, you've done a lot with web and phones and tablets and that sort of stuff. You're very familiar with REST.
Right.
So this
representational state transfer.
Exactly.
For those listening.
So this is almost the equivalent of REST for data movement. The pipeline will pick up in SSIS. It'll pick up some number of rows. The default's 10,000, but it usually picks up some less than that. And then it does some operation on it. Initially, it just picks it up and starts it down the path to the next component. But then it'll pick up the next bucket of data, and it'll just continue doing this. They call them buffers. They are buffers in RAM. They're populating. And it does all these transformations unless you're doing ELT. So if you're doing extract, transform, and load, you would pick up stuff, and then you would do transformations. And a transformation could be anything as innocuous as a changing of a data type, casting to a different data type. It could be either constructing or deconstructing contents of a data row column, one field, just take that apart and deconstruct it. And you see this with dates that are listed in, just CCYYMMDD. You may just want to separate out the year part of that, the century and the year part. And then you may want to run a calculation on the month to then create a value that indicates which quarter it's in. All of that falls into the bucket of transformation. And when you're doing ETL, you would do that operation if you're using SSIS inside of the data flow task. And if you're not, if you're doing ELT, you would just load all of that data from, point A to point B. And then somewhere over there in point B, you would run a follow-up process that would then do all of that magic that you would have done in the pipeline. And
so it's just changing the order of where the work gets done.
It is. It's the order and where. So in SSIS, that execution, that all of that transformation would occur in RAM. If you are using SQL Server as your target and you're doing the transformation there, then the relational engine would be doing the transformation, and it would be doing it in the big umbrella of SQL OS in the relational engine. And the stored procedures are a common way to do that. So, yeah.
Interesting. So then is it, so I have a couple of questions. Sure. One is, I'm assuming the programming language here is it's in T-SQL or Transact SQL?
It is if you're, once you get to the transformation logic, if you're doing that in T-SQL, you are using SSIS specific tasks, it's an interesting GUI. It's drag and drop. and it's programmable as, most of the time through editors that are graphical. You can perform logic on it using T-SQL. There is an expression language in SSIS that is very powerful and also very hard to learn. It is finicky. It's very picky.
Is it DAX?
It's worse than DAX. Patrick LeBlanc, who is one of the Guy in a Cube guys, we got to get them on the show. We've done some data points with them. We got to do a bigger interview with them. They're awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Patrick, years ago, he did SSIS training, and he's a really good SSIS developer and architect. I heard Patrick once at a presentation describe SSIS expression language as Transact SQL or T-SQL and C# getting together and having a bastard child. And that's what it looks like. It's very much a mix of operators, and there's it's not random case sensitivity, but it feels that way when you start learning it. You can capitalize or not capitalize the names of the functions in expression language, for instance, like the is null function. You can write that any way you want. But if you are testing to see if a field value in that particular row in the data flow is null or not, you better match the case of that field name. If you don't, it's over at that point. And if you're testing that, not just the value, but if you're also comparing inside of SSIS the values from, say, two case insensitive databases, you're pulling them in and trying to match. You may have a match on, say, lowercase aa and uppercase aa if you were writing this in T-SQL. But if you do it in expression language, it will call that a mismatch. Even if the data sources are case-insensitive collations, SSIS is still case-sensitive when it does its comparison. So that's one of the corners. So,
right. So is it called USQL or does it have its own name?
So USQL is what we use to talk to data lakes, and I know you've been doing some work in that. You're almost done with another certification, Frank. By the way, if you want to be challenged, if you want to have a role model for certifications, go to LinkedIn and look up Frank Lavenia and scroll down to that certifications. It won't be hard to find because it's a big chunk of that page. I'm just saying.
It might be the largest chunk now. Yeah.
What are you up to now? It's 20 some.
I think 23, and then I got 17 in 2017, and I think you were joking with me. Maybe I should shoot for 18 in 2018. Which is funny because I got 4 in January.
Wow.
But I slacked off in February and got none. Wow. March is a new month. I'm actually in the middle of the real-time streaming analytics one on edX.
Cool. I did that one.
Taught by Graham Malcolm.
I can't believe I've done one that I finished one.
That I haven't done? That's funny. But so I mean, when you said, because USQL is kind of a mishmash of, I wouldn't call it the bastard child, but it's definitely an odd mix of like, it reminds me of a South Park episode where they started doing gene splicing and they shouldn't have done. But so USQL is kind of a mix of C# and T-SQL. Is this the same language?
No,
or is it something?
So this is different. SSIS expression language is its own animal, and I imagine there's similarities to USQL. I don't know enough about USQL to make that statement, but it is, and we've seen this, Frank, all over the .NET spectrum here, especially the last few years, as gosh, it's probably been 10 years now since they introduced language integrated query or LINQ. We saw this. I'll describe it as SQL-ish. Stuff come into the .NET language. And interestingly, I use LINQ. I actually write some code in C# every now and then. I feel like I've worked my way up to being a noob at C#. I think I've attained noobness. But yeah, I'm getting there. But I use LINQ, but not LINQ to SQL. I find that it just looks wrong to me. It feels wrong. And that's just an opinion. I promise I'm not qualified to criticize it. And even if I was, it's probably awesome. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know a better way to describe LINQ to SQL than that.
Well, it's one of those things where SQL is more of a set-based kind of quasi-functional language.
It is, yeah.
C# is more, I don't want to say procedural, but
Yeah.
it kind of is more, it's definitely more procedural than functional.
Yeah. And yeah, imperial, I forget all of the terms that are out there to describe languages. There's all sorts
Imperative.
of descriptors for it, but I'm more interested in what I can do with it. And this is the expression language is probably one of the steepest learning curves on the slope of learning SSIS. But if you learn it, it is extremely powerful. So, and that's kind of sort of the trade-off I see all over software is things that are difficult or, making you type just so with the cases and stuff like that. They're usually more powerful.
So then you mentioned buffers and RAM. And that is the hallmark of Spark, where it does in-memory processing. So how does SSIS compare or contrast to Spark and the Hadoop world? Kind of that kind of ecosystem.
Well, on the comparison side, they can both be used for, of course, for data integration. Spark has other uses. Spark is more of a framework where you can drop in different, modules, plug in different things, and it'll just do it. SSIS is more limited in scope than that. It's more focused on data integration. Although you can do other things with SSIS, there's things you should never do with SSIS. So.
Right.
And from a contrast standpoint, Spark was designed from the ground up to run in a distributed network. It doesn't need, you don't have to think about how am I going to make this run in parallel. SSIS, you do have to think about how I'm going to make this run in parallel. You have to be aware of I guess different constraints is probably the best way to describe it. It's possible to use an awful lot of RAM in SSIS, and it's not hard. And so if you're not careful and you're running a couple of things that are RAM heavy in parallel, you can run out of RAM. And depending on the operation, that can be really bad.
Interesting. Like what could happen?
Well, if you're populating lookup transformations, which is a popular way to do different types of load patterns, like the incremental load pattern. And when I say incremental load pattern, there's dozens of those variations on those. But you almost always have to perform a lookup operation. You're trying to compare the source that you're reading to the destination. If nothing else, you're looking to see, are there rows in the source that currently don't exist in the destination? And there's this implied arrow of time, right? The source should be more up to date than the destination. That's usually the way SSIS and data integration works. And if you're doing a lookup, you're trying to find out, is it here but not there? Then the next step is let's load it to there. Let's put it in the destination. Lookup transformations fail if they run out of RAM. And I have a story about that. Back in the day, I was hired by Unisys to work with Medicaid data, and we used the ES7000s. And I want to say we had 96 CPUs and a terabyte of RAM in production. And I filled up a terabyte of RAM with an SSIS 2005 lookup transformation. It took almost 24 hours, but I did it. And it crashed after I filled up RAM.
Wow, a terabyte of RAM. So my next question is, because I'm playing the role of the FNG, what exactly is an ES7000? Is that a class of server?
Yeah, it's a big old box, Frank, that Unisys had forever, and they're still out there. And 96 CPUs is still a lot, and this was 10 years ago. We had those boxes. We could get some massive parallelization going on. There was all sorts of tweaks that they were doing to the operating system. They were running Windows Server, and then SQL Server on top of that. There were tweaks for that, just special for that much parallelism. And in a Windows system, 96 CPUs is probably still considered massively parallel. Yeah, we got to play with a lot of that. There was some statistics that Microsoft released about how much time it took them to load a terabyte of data using SSIS. And the first one I heard back in the 2005 days was it took 30 minutes. And then there was a follow-up that it only took 10. And I know the guy that did that with Microsoft was actually working at Microsoft at the time, Henk van der Valk. He's no longer at Unisys, but I think he's an independent consultant now in Europe. But Henk was the guy who was able to load that much data that fast. And that was blazing speeds back then. It's not too shabby now.
I was going to say that's respectable now. So one of the things I noticed was when you started tweeting and blogging about that you were learning Spark, because when I was going through the Spark classes, I was like, you really need to check this out. I don't think it's exactly like what you do in SSIS, but a lot of the things sound very similar to me.
Yeah. So,
and you started tweeting about it when you started going through the certification classes for it, and that freaked out some people.
It did. Every time.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I've had this experience before, Frank. Back in 2009, 2010 era, I was a SQL Server MVP for 5 years there, and I played around with some other technology. It was a company called Expressor. Their tech has been bought by Qlik, the QlikView people, and since then, but they reached out and we talked about the differences between SSIS and the Expressor product, and that raised similar concerns. There were some people that felt like, I think, that like I was betraying SSIS or I was a big traitor, and I was like, well, no. SSIS is an awesome tool, and I do love it. I still do, and I think it's a fantastic bargain. Technically, it's free. When you purchase the Relational Engine license, you just get the BI stack for free, and that's hard to beat for a value proposition, right? When you do that division, you get an error,
right?
So there's that. But I felt like it was a similar episode. Of course, I wasn't an MVP anymore, so I didn't get any kind of pressure along the same channels as I did there, and it wasn't bad. I don't want to speak bad of my experience as an MVP, but I feel like there was some legitimate questions raised, but there were questions raised. Mm-hmm. So, but it was that kind of thing. People were like, are you going open source too? Because a lot of people have gone that path, right? Yeah, you remember the alt.net movement. There was a lot of kind of that crowd didn't like .NET in the early days back, I don't know, I guess 2000 to 2005 or something. And they kind of went off and did open source stuff. And I get it. But I wasn't going down that path, but I did get that kind of, I got some pushback on it. I got some people sending me emails. They were concerned, and I blogged about it. Just a little. I was most impressed so far in my studies, and I'm working on the big data certification like you are. And I was most impressed with Apache Storm.
Yeah, that is.
Man, I found that very validating, and I want to dig into that some more. There's some stuff I want to do that I'm not going to talk about because I don't want anybody else to beat me to it. But, but it really does lend itself to design patterns. I mean, it's just obvious, and it's super fast. I mean, the data. The hardest part of me moving data for Apache Storm was actually uploading it on my little 25 meg DSL pipe here in Farmville. After I got it up there, it just flew, and it's in Azure. So it is a Microsoft offering. HD Insight is up there, Spark and Storm, and you can create all of these clusters and stuff. But yeah, I was really, really floored by that. And one little tidbit, and I'll shut up, is, for years I looked at SSIS and I said, this is missing. It's not bad, wrong, broken, defective. It's just there's some parts missing. And I've written most recently about data integration lifecycle management, and it's still a struggle for many developers to do things. And there's some things, Frank, you just flat can't do. You can't compare SSIS packages, the current version, to the one you stored in source control yesterday. You can. I'll take that back. You can do the comparison, but it's not very helpful. So,
Right.
you know,
So what is I've seen you write and tweet about DILM, which I'm assuming stands for Data Integration Lifecycle
you got it.
Management. What exactly does that
Well,
mean?
all of the cool. You and I are both developers. I mean, we just are. I was an MCSD back before .NET. You've got 20 years software development, and when I jumped the fence and started doing data stuff, I was used to being able to operate in a life cycle where I had multiple tiers: dev, test, QA, UAT, production. I was used to source control just working. I was used to the idea of testing software. I practiced test-driven development. That actually came out before .NET was generally available. Kent Beck's book, and I really got into that. And then I got over to the data side of stuff, and I was like, "Where is all this?" And it just felt like it was missing. And there's been a lot of work, and I feel it's been kind of slow going, but a lot of work has been put into database lifecycle management. Redgate, for instance, has a fantastic tool. I think they probably led the charge in DLM. And there's been work done here and there on data integration lifecycle management, specifically with SSIS. Now, some of the other platforms, Frank, that are out there for data integration, they do this. They have it all built in. They've got a way to manage it. And the flip side is, you can pay $1 million maintenance fee per year for some of those. So it's a balance, right? Zero, $1 million, DILM, or kind of roll your own DILM. And I've been in that.
Right. But if your team's big enough, if you roll your own, it's going to cost.
It's going to
anyway.
cost. Yeah, it is. It's going to cost more than zero. But is it going to hit $1 million? I don't think so. I think that's I
mean, if your data team is big enough,
I guess it
possibly,
could, but it's not that hard to do it. And I'm not the only person who's thought about this. Pragmatic Works has a solution for testing SSIS packages that hooks right into the Visual Studio Test Framework. It's called Legitest. They've solved that. I've written a tool called SSIS Catalog Compare, a little commercial here, that will do like a comparison of packages and their configurations metadata stored in an SSIS catalog. And the version I'm working on now actually will compare across all versions of the catalog. So 2012, 2014, 2016, 2017, and the cloud. It'll actually do the cloud stuff. Not only does it do that, but you can generate a script from either of those sources and then apply it to any of those destinations. It is, at this time at least, the catalogs are so similar that I don't need to be specific. So I can upgrade, downgrade. I can move things around, once it's deployed somewhere, especially the metadata. And that's kind of the tricky part. So I may have, 100 variables defined in what's called an environment, a catalog environment. It's difficult to script those out of the SSIS catalog inside of the tool that ships from Microsoft. It's not impossible, but it isn't as intuitive as you think it would be. And I just throw everything into a tree, and you can right click on a node and say, blow out these scripts. And you can do specific things, or you can say script the entire catalog. And, it's very handy for that sort of stuff. So.
Oh, so is this like when you want to script out create a script that would create a copy of the schema of the database?
It's similar.
Is this the same thing, but
very similar.
Okay. Because I was wondering what exactly is what is a catalog? Because when I hear catalog, I think a repository of data, like the old Sears catalog. But so what exactly is a catalog in this context? Because that's something that I've always saw you say catalog compare catalogs, and I'm like, my first thought was like, when you're a kid, you're looking at the Toys R Us catalog in one hand and then the Sears toy one in the other. So what exactly does that mean?
It's a very fair question. So the SSIS catalog that Microsoft developed, it's an SSIS framework, and you use that for managing execution, for managing storage of packages, and then for managing things like configurations. So you can externalize values parameter values from an SSIS process. And what that allows you to do is it promotes code reuse. So as I said earlier, SSIS suffers some from having the name SQL Server in the title. It's not a database. It's an application development platform. And all of the software best practices apply, Frank. So decoupling, separation of concerns, testing, code reuse, all of those things apply to SSIS. But when I'm preaching so much about DILM because we don't have the same tool set as software developers have. So,
yeah, that's something that fascinated me too. Is you look at this and it's just like source control and continuous integration. It's just like, there's in consulting you see a lot of variables and environments, but so not every development environment has one deployed. But this is I'm going to go out and let and say this is a solved problem. For software engineers at least. So when you kind of see the data side of things where this isn't really worked out. I mean, last summer I was on a project where there was some debate about, well, the stored procedures and table scripts, should we check them into source control or not? And I'm like, why wouldn't you?
No, you're absolutely right. And I understand why, and you understand why too, because the code that we use, say for a C# project, the tools that are out there for that, they were built for checking in code, and the nature of the code itself really lends itself to that. Here's a classic example of why database lifecycle management is so hard. Is I roll out version 2, and and version 2 includes adding a new column to my people table. Maybe I'm collecting a new piece of data from my website, and I've got a new website piece of code that goes up and has a field for that. And it goes out there and starts collecting the data. I realize a week later there's a bug and I need to roll back. I can't patch it and fix it. So what do I do with that column? So I've got data in there. It's valid. Do I drop it? Do I, do I just ignore it? Do I make it nullable if it wasn't nullable? There's a whole host of problems that surround data lifecycle management and therefore data integration lifecycle management. When you start talking about things like, about like rollbacks, which is a very neat and frankly, kind of a rescue of some software projects. So that's just one of the concerns. There's others that are just specific to practicing any kind of lifecycle management related to data.
So is this one of the, this is clearly a drawback for the kids listening who are hearing this, that are coming from a NoSQL background. Is this really a kind of a consequence of the primacy of the schema in RDBMS?
That's a good point, Frank. I'd say so. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but you and I have had these discussions about, the term schemaless.
Right.
And neither of us.
Right.
We agree.
That's the new one.
But schemaless or the other terms, they aren't. It's not entirely accurate to quote Independence Day.
Right. So I think what's interesting is that maybe this is why NoSQL databases have been so embraced by the developer community. You hear the mean stack, and then Mongo is part of that. Mongo is a NoSQL database. Maybe that's why they kind of took to that faster than RDBMS. You think that's a thing?
No,
or,
I totally agree.
There's
always been an impedance mismatch between the way we build software and the way we store data. And that is being nice. Object relational mapping software, ORMs, have been developed to bridge that gap. The entity framework is one. There's all sorts of frameworks out there to do that. Yeah. And Mongo has a really neat ability to, JavaScript, I should say, has a neat ability where you can just basically .save and you can store the object. You can persist an object right into a database. And because Mongo works the way that it does, it just goes there without having to create a schema and think about all of the different columns and data types. And it's a lot easier in that. And I totally get why people would want to do that. There's a lot of baby in the bathwater of a relational database engine. And as we've seen, and as we are seeing, even in 2018, our DBMS is moving to the cloud. We're starting to see things happen around the classic ACID properties, which is atomicity and consistency. Consistency is a big one when you go to the cloud. Isolation and durability. And all of those suffer a little bit when you change platforms, when you change the infrastructure. That impacts the ACID properties of data. There's some real benefits to running with NoSQL, hands down. But what we're seeing is the lines are being blurred between NoSQL and SQL, especially in the cloud. So you take Cosmos, right? You can pick your consistency model. But until you can, it's not just the speed of light anymore. It's the speed of the infrastructure that you're running on. So the pipe actually affects this now. It's no longer the difference between writing to a log file and that log file then committing the transaction to a data file. Now you've got latency that's just inherent in quasi connections types like phones and tablets and anything running on Wi-Fi. There's a quasi connectedness there. So it looks like, well, it's just going to add to the complexity. It doesn't. It actually multiplies and in some cases exponentiates the complexity of managing that. So we've got to come up with ways to manage that. And it all feeds back into integration and data engineering. It's all coming back to that because the closer to real time you want to get, and when you start talking about near real time, Frank, in data engineering, you're really talking more about processing signals than we've ever talked about in this field. And I'm fortunate in that my background is in electronics. So I learned analog, right? So, when we start talking about processing signals, I'm breaking out my old signal processing class book, my communications, electronic communications textbook. And I'm finding all of these patterns that apply now. And we're able to bring those to bear for clients who are trying to do what I call near real time. They'll call real time, but I'm not comfortable saying that. I'll say near.
I've made the mistake. It depends. Real time is in the eye of the beholder. I made the mistake in a room full of engineers in Silicon Valley saying getting data real time. And then someone, I'm not going to say which organization was from, but they had a huge research arm at the time. You can probably figure out who it is. Just looking at LinkedIn, you can probably figure out who it is. And they were like, no, nothing's ever really real time because, the speed of light. And then he went on this, even as I talk to you, you're not hearing me in real time. There's a slight delay between. That's an
engineering thing. And okay. I get it. And also physicists, right? They'll get that way.
Well, that's the background of this person was that. Okay. I said, for the layman or, on the average Joe or Jane, real time is, real time. And I mean, what's interesting is because we are moving to the cloud of consistency, and Cosmos is a fascinating product because it just has so many different, it's like a shape-shifting product, right? I mean, not only can you change the consistency model, but you could change the API model. It's like, what sorcery is this? It's just like, and we had Rimaneme, who was a big force behind that, and she was explaining it, and I was just like, this is when I had first heard about it, and I was like, this sounds like magic. This doesn't sound like it's possible. Like the SLA of consistency within 5 milliseconds is just globally.
Well, I have a confession, impossible. That I did not realize until I was taking some recent training on NoSQL at edX that I had not ever played with DocumentDB. And it's clear once you study DocumentDB or take any training on it, and I don't know how much longer it's going to be around, but that's what Azure basically started. Cosmos started as DocumentDB. And it did have that. It had the consistency models, and it had a couple of interfaces. that you could hit it with. But absolutely, when they announced Cosmos DB, and I want to say it was last May or something, Frank. It's not even been a year.
Yeah, well,
so yeah, I agree with you. It's what sorcery is this?
Right, and it's just and then so I'm doing a series of trainings on Azure, focused towards the Azure Government Platform, which is essentially a subset of Azure Commercial. One of the things that when we had the labs and we talk about this, and you see kind of the documentation and APIs, the some of the wording, they use the term Cosmos DB and Document DB interchangeably. Probably because it originally was just Document DB, but they've since expanded it, and they've expanded at a pretty rapid rate. And the other thing is explaining consistency models to traditional database developers or traditional developers is it's very hard for them to grasp, because we enterprise developers or people who work in large companies, it's traditionally been always RDBMS. There has been one consistency model, I would say.
Yeah.
And so the idea of multiple, eventual consistency sounds like blasphemy.
It does.
And and I kind of say, well, I mean, it all depends on what your use case is. This is the example I give. Like, if you update your bank account, or you're spending money, like in your credit card, or you transfer money, that you want immediate consistency.
Absolutely.
Right. There's no question about that.
Right.
Anything transactional, you want that. If it takes another like 20 minutes for my Instagram photos or feed to be updated to the latest version, is it a nuisance? Yeah, probably a nuisance, but who really cares?
Right. Well, it bothers you during that time period, but I think the psychology behind this is important. And I think it's driving this idea of eventual consistency. So here's using exactly what you just described, Frank. If you don't look at it until 11 minutes after you post it, let's say you post a picture of your awesome kids or the dogs, and I look at it, it takes 10 minutes to be consistent. And then I look at it, 10 minutes and 1 second later, I don't see any delay. I don't experience the eventual consistency. Right. And as long as you bound the chaos, and we could talk about this for another 2 days, probably. As long as you bound the chaos, there's some graphs where the lines cross, and it turns out, if you look at the lifetime of the digital information, the data, that over the lifetime of that those lines cross way, way, way early. So that's the kind of the psychology. That's the art part that makes eventual consistency just really not that big of a deal. Now, if you're doing stock trades, okay, yeah, it is a big deal. You need immediate consistency for that. And there's a bunch of use cases out there where immediate consistency is the rule. And those aren't going away. So there's always going to be a need for that, regardless of the engine. It may be a relational database engines. I don't think RDBMSs are going away, but we found this whole other class of stuff that doesn't really require all that. And it turns out to just be a lot of overhead in some cases. And in other cases, Frank, it's completely unnecessary overhead.
Right. And I also think, too, that as data expands into new territories, it's going to have to change and evolve, too. Like our data structures are going to have to change. I think that's what we're seeing. Yep. For the longest time, databases have been the sole domain of large enterprises. Then it became small enterprises. Businesses, basically, they conduct transactions. Sure. Transactions, by their nature, demand real time. Yep. Or, that engineer, if he does listen, he's probably like foaming right now at the mouth. Like, it's not real time. Real time enough, right? That's now gonna, RTE, right? Real time enough. But as data kind of expands into these new domains, I mean, working on websites and things that were not transactional, you always felt like stuffing your data. I didn't really understand it then, but now kind of looking back, It makes sense. You felt like you were shoving not a round peg into a square hole, but like like an octagon shaped. Like it just felt awkward. Like you were trying to shove something there that you were trying to stuff it in, or you're trying to like it's like putting leftovers in. You pick too small of a Tupperware container, and you're like trying to jam, but it's soft like potatoes, so like you're trying to jam it in. It just doesn't feel right. And then but now I get it, because that whole acid principles that you mentioned is just doesn't always apply. And those, I mean, again, I think it goes back to something that we discussed when Kevin Hazard was on the show.
Oh, definitely. And I was just thinking of Kevin's article that's out at SQLauthority.com, Pinal Davi's site. If you go out there and search for SQLauthority.com and Kevin Hazard, he wrote an article that was basically what would it look like if we designed the first database today? And thinking about he focused on in memory versus persisting to disk. But, Frank, we've had this conversation. The truth is the operating systems that we're running on right now weren't designed to run on SSDs even. And when we're running them on SSDs, we're kind of hobbling the SSDs a little bit to say, act more like a spindle.
Right. And it's just the pace of of innovation in the engineering of the hardware has outpaced the software industry, which has been a long time since that's been the case. It goes
back and forth, and it's always going to go back and forth. I mean, you're going to have software demanding more of the hardware than it can deliver, and that's going to happen. It'll happen again. But yeah, this is kind of where we are right now, and that's a fascinating article. Kevin is super smart. If you haven't listened to that show, go listen to it.
We'll put that in the show notes and a link to his article.
Yep. We'll have to do that.
Yeah, we've been super busy, so sorry about not.
It's my fault. Actually, I do something. I do the show notes. I forgot, and the reason I forgot is I haven't been doing a very good job of getting them done lately. So I apologize for that. I'll get that caught up. But this has been a really great talk about data integration and data engineering. I think I tell you, Frank, what I'd love to do next time is let's switch roles. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that we talked about, data engineering versus data science in our first deep dive. Let me be the interviewer, and let you be the interviewee, and I'll ask you questions about data science next deep dive.
Okay. I think interviewer and interviewee sounds better than expert and FNG.
I cringe at the term expert. I always say experienced. I'm still learning, Frank.
That's what living is all about. I think one of the things I've learned in the last few years is that if you're not continuously learning, you are slowly dying.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
That would be my takeaway from 2016, 2017. And so for the first 2 months of or 3 months now of 2018 is that you have to keep learning. There's a number of reasons why. Maybe we'll do a show on that too, like how was I able to get 17 certifications.
That'd be a great show. Well, we could work that into the data science show, because that was you got that data science certification from Microsoft through edX.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I'll have the data engineering one too in about next month. But
I'm hoping to do that with you. I'm close, but I have a couple more classes to get done here in the next couple of weeks.
You could do
it. You say that you could do it. I don't know if I could or not.
I only know I can do it because I did it. Everything's. I've listened to an audiobook, and it was basically what's it called? Relentless is the name of the audiobook.
Yes.
Basically, it's about a guy who was a sports trainer for Michael Jordan and then the Chicago Bulls, and basically every big name in basketball and sports, he's worked with them. And so basically, he says, everything's impossible until somebody does it.
Wow.
And I was like, you know what? That is true. It's a good audiobook, which is actually an awesome segue, because Audible is a sponsor of the show, and they have hooked us up with a free book for our listeners. What's the URL, Andy?
It is thedatadrivenbook.com.
Cool. So if you go to that link, if you're not already signed up on Audible, you'll be able to get one free audiobook, and Relentless is a good one. There's a lot of foul language in that one. Just be warned. But I thought it was an interesting book. It kind of talks about it, even though his focus is sports, it's not a big stretch of the imagination to apply it to other things.
Right.
And it's like, and I'll probably be the first person in history to compare, software engineers and data engineers as to athletes, professional athletes. But I'm going to go there because that's what we do. We forge new roads.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, those guys and gals, they have to continuously work on their body, right? Even Michael Jordan, he worked personally with Michael Jordan. He says, Michael Jordan always practiced. He always, even though he was the best in his, in the league and arguably the best of all time so far. But he basically said, Michael Jordan at 18 is not Michael Jordan at 34. Right. The body responds differently. There's it's just the way it is. So like he had to constantly train to be, perform at that level at age 34 than he did when he was in college.
Right.
So it was just interesting. And it's an interesting book about like, I found it very motivational. So
cool.
And so let us know if you want us to call interviewee an expert, or you want to keep the moniker of FNG and I don't know, guru. I don't know. Let us know. We love getting feedback. We've got some awesome feedback so far, and we love our listeners. And if you were offended by our jokes about the British use of the English language, we were just kidding, folks. Some of our best listeners are actually in the UK. And what I meant to say was at the end of it, I don't know if I said this. I did say it, but it was kind of like, they act like they invented the language. And I was like, oh yeah, they did. We're the silly Americans. Like that's kind of what I meant.
That's us. And we have a nice British lady that'll take us out.
We do. And we actually got a question about that. Speaking of feedback.
That's true.
Which I don't think we ever discussed. So somebody said, well, hey, why do you have a British lady doing the voiceover for the intros and the outros? And I was like, well, with me and my kind of New York, New Jersey accent, and Andy with his gentlemanly Southern drawl, we didn't want to make it too East Coast or too American. So we thought, let's class it up. Let's make it a bit posh with a nice British accent.
That's it.
So in case you're wondering. So with that, I will let the nice British lady end the show.
Thanks for listening to Data Driven. Don't just listen. Become a data driver by going to datadriven.tv to sign up to join the community, access to special events, tips and tricks, and more. Sign up today at datadriven.tv.